In the summer of 1901, children in Greencastle, Indiana stopped casting shadows. Their parents noticed it first during evening prayers, when lamplight failed to project the familiar silhouettes of small bodies against parlor walls. By August, 12 children had vanished completely, leaving behind only their shoes. The town blamed a traveling ice cream vendor named Silas Crow. But when the sheriff finally opened Crow's cart on August 29th, he didn't find bodies. He found something that made him burn down 3 churches before taking his own life. Greencastle sits in Putnam County, about 40 miles west of Indianapolis. In 1901, it was a farming community of roughly 3,000 souls, most of them God-fearing Methodists who worked the corn and wheat fields that stretched between the town proper and the Walnut Creek bottomlands. The town had one general store, 2 churches, a small schoolhouse, and a reputation for being unremarkable. That changed when Silas Crow arrived on June 14th. The 1900 census recorded no person by that name in Putnam County or any surrounding area. No records exist of his birth, his family, or his origins. He simply appeared one Friday afternoon, pushing a bright yellow cart decorated with painted stars and crescent moons. The cart had large wooden wheels and a hand-painted sign that read, "Crow's Frozen Delights, a Taste of Heaven." Martha Hendricks, who ran the general store, wrote about their first encounter in her diary. The entry, dated June 14th, 1901, describes Crow as a man of indeterminate age with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed to catch no light. She noted that he wore a cream-colored suit despite the summer heat and never seemed to perspire. Most disturbing to her was his smile, which she described as too wide, like his face was borrowed and didn't quite fit. Crow set up his cart near the town square, right beside the Methodist church. He sold ice cream for 2 cents a scoop, which was cheaper than what the general store charged for store-bought varieties shipped from Indianapolis. The ice cream itself seemed normal enough at first. Vanilla, strawberry, chocolate. Children loved it. Parents appreciated the price. But something was wrong from the beginning. Reverend Thomas Wickham kept meticulous records of his congregation's attendance. In his ledger for June 16, 1901, he noted that young Samuel Porter, age 8, attended morning services with his family. The Reverend wrote a strange observation in the margin. The Porter boy seemed present, yet absent, answered when called, but looked through me rather than at me. Samuel's mother, Elizabeth Porter, took her concerns to Doc Waverly 3 days later. According to Waverly's medical notes, dated June 19th, she reported that Samuel had become thin as paper. Not physically thin, but somehow less substantial. She said that in certain lights, she could almost see through him. When she held him close, he felt lighter than he should, as if parts of him were missing. Doc Waverly examined the boy and found nothing physically wrong. Heart rate normal, lungs clear, weight appropriate for his age and height. But he noted something peculiar in his records. The child's shadow appears faint, even in direct sunlight. Unable to explain this phenomenon through any medical means. By the end of June, 3 more children showed the same symptoms. All of them had purchased ice cream from Silas Crow multiple times. Their parents noticed the same things: a certain translucence in bright light, shadows that seemed too pale, a sense that their children were slowly becoming less real. The town doctor couldn't explain it. The Reverend called for prayer meetings. And Silas Crow kept selling ice cream, that unsettling smile never leaving his face. On July 4th, Independence Day, the town held its annual celebration in the square. Crow's cart was there doing brisk business. Parents who had worried about the strange reports convinced themselves they were overreacting. Children were getting enough sun and fresh air. The heat was making everyone imagine things. That's when Sarah Hendricks, Martha's 9-year-old daughter, disappeared. She had been playing near the bandstand with 6 other children. Martha looked away for just a moment, distracted by the fireworks display. When she turned back, Sarah was gone. The other children said Sarah had been there 1 second and simply wasn't there the next. They hadn't seen her leave. She had just ceased to be visible. The sheriff organized a search party. 30 men combed through every building, barn, and field within 5 miles. They dragged Walnut Creek. They searched the woods. They found nothing except Sarah's shoes, placed neatly together near Crow's cart. 3 days later, 2 more children vanished the same way. Timothy Walsh, age 7, disappeared from his own bedroom. His mother had tucked him in, turned down the lamp, and stepped into the hallway. When she returned 2 minutes later to check on him, the bed was empty. Only his small leather shoes remained, positioned side by side on the floor. Emily Crawford, age 10, vanished while sitting in the front pew during Sunday services. Her father was giving testimony when he glanced down and saw that Emily's seat was empty. Her shoes sat on the bench where she'd been sitting moments before. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Every missing child had regularly purchased ice cream from Silas Crow. Every disappearance left behind only shoes, and every child had shown that same strange translucence before vanishing. Sheriff Walter Kemp finally confronted Crow on July 15th. According to his official report, filed with the county clerk, Kemp demanded to inspect the cart. Crow simply smiled and said, "Be my guest, Sheriff. I have nothing to hide." The cart was exactly what it appeared to be, a wooden box lined with zinc, filled with ice and salt. 3 large containers held vanilla, strawberry, and chocolate ice cream. Everything seemed normal. Kemp even tasted the ice cream himself, finding nothing unusual about it. But Deputy Marcus Thorne, who was present during the inspection, wrote something different in his personal journal. He described watching Crow serve ice cream to the sheriff. As Crow scooped from the vanilla container, Thorne swore he saw something move in the ice cream itself, something dark and writhing, like smoke trapped beneath a frozen surface. When he blinked, it was gone. The disappearances continued through July. 1 or 2 children per week, always after eating Crow's ice cream, always leaving behind their shoes. The parents who still had children began keeping them inside. They locked doors and windows. They prayed constantly. But somehow, children still managed to sneak out and visit Crow's cart. It was as if they were being called. Anna Pearson, who lived beside the town square, kept a detailed diary. Her entry from July 28th describes hearing singing late at night, children's voices, coming from somewhere near Crow's cart. She looked out her window and saw children standing in a circle around the cart, all of them barefoot, all of them translucent in the moonlight. They swayed and sang in a language she didn't recognize. When she looked closer, she realized some of the children were the ones who had vanished weeks earlier. She ran to wake her husband, and by the time they returned to the window, the children were gone. The next morning, Anna's daughter Rebecca was missing. Only her shoes remained. By early August, 12 children had disappeared. The town was in a state of panic. Some families packed up and left. Others formed armed patrols. Reverend Wickham organized continuous prayer vigils, claiming the devil had come to Greencastle and only faith could drive him out. But Silas Crow kept selling ice cream. If you're finding this story unsettling, you might want to consider subscribing. This channel covers dozens of forgotten horror stories from American history, and you won't want to miss what happens next. On August 15th, Doc Waverly made a discovery. He'd been reviewing his medical notes and noticed something about the missing children. All 12 had lost their shadows before disappearing completely. The shadow faded first, growing paler over several weeks, and then the child would vanish. He formed a theory. Whatever was happening to the children, it wasn't immediate. It was gradual. The ice cream was somehow extracting something essential from them. Their shadows weren't just failing to appear, they were being taken. Waverly shared his findings with Sheriff Kemp, who dismissed them as superstitious nonsense. But Kemp's wife Helen didn't dismiss them. She had been keeping her own records, and she noticed something the sheriff had overlooked. Silas Crow's shadow was wrong. Most people cast a single shadow that matches their form, but Helen had observed Crow carefully for weeks, and she swore his shadow contained multiples. In bright sunlight, his single silhouette seemed to writhe with dozens of smaller shadows, all of them child-sized, all of them moving independently of Crow himself. She told her husband what she'd seen. He didn't believe her, so she showed him herself, dragging him to the town square at noon on August 23rd when the sun was directly overhead. They positioned themselves across from Crow's cart and watched his shadow on the ground. According to Sheriff Kemp's later testimony, given to a county investigator before Kemp's death, he saw exactly what his wife described. Crow's shadow contained at least a dozen smaller shadows. They moved within the larger silhouette like fish in dark water. Sometimes a small hand would press against the boundary of the shadow as if trying to escape. Sometimes he could see the outline of a small face, mouth open in a silent scream. The children weren't gone. They were trapped inside Silas Crow's shadow. Kemp immediately drew his revolver and aimed it at Crow, demanding he explain what was happening. Crow's smile finally faded. He looked directly at the sheriff and spoke in a voice that Kemp described as wrong, like multiple voices speaking in unison. "I'm not taking anything they don't freely give," Crow said. "They come to me willingly. They eat what I offer. The transaction is complete." "Transaction?" Kemp demanded. "What transaction?" "Substance for sweet," Crow replied. "Shadow for cream. They choose the trade, Sheriff. I merely facilitate it." Kemp fired 3 shots. All 3 hit Crow's center mass. The man staggered backward but didn't fall. No blood appeared on his cream-colored suit. Instead, his shadow darkened and expanded, spreading across the ground like spilled ink. The small shadows within it began moving more frantically. That's when Kemp heard the children screaming. The sound didn't come from the children's mouths. It came from the shadow itself, echoing up from the dark space where the missing children were trapped. 12 voices crying out in terror and pain, begging to be released. Crow laughed. The sound made Kemp's ears bleed. "You can't kill me, Sheriff. I'm already a shadow. I've always been a shadow. And these children are mine now." Kemp did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed a lamp from a nearby shop, smashed it against Crow's cart, and set it on fire. The cart went up immediately, the dry wood catching like kindling. Flames engulfed the painted stars and crescent moons. Silas Crow didn't try to stop him. He just stood there, smiling again, watching his cart burn. And as the fire grew, his shadow began to change. The small shadows inside Crow's silhouette started pulling away. One by one, they detached from his larger shadow and scattered across the ground in different directions. Child-shaped shadows racing away from the burning cart, moving independently across the town square, disappearing down alleyways and between buildings. Kemp chased after them, but shadows moved faster than men. Within seconds, they had all vanished into the town's darker corners. When Kemp returned to the cart, Silas Crow was gone. Only his shadow remained, painted on the ground like a stain, even though there was nothing present to cast it. The cart burned down to ash. Kemp ordered the ash buried in a deep hole outside town limits. But the story doesn't end there. Over the next week, strange reports came in from across Greencastle. People seeing child-shaped shadows in places where no child stood. Parents waking to find shadow children standing beside their beds, watching them sleep. Dark silhouettes pressed against windows, leaving no handprints, making no sound. The 12 missing children never returned. Their shoes remained the only physical evidence they'd ever existed, but their shadows were everywhere, haunting the town like hungry ghosts. Sheriff Kemp became obsessed with finding the children. He spent days tracking the shadows, trying to understand where they went. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. His own shadow began to change, growing darker and more solid, as if it were feeding on his obsession. On August 29th, 6 days after burning Crow's cart, Kemp entered the Methodist church during morning services. He was carrying 2 containers of lamp oil. Before anyone could stop him, He poured the oil over the pews and set it ablaze. He moved quickly, burning down 3 churches in succession, each time screaming that the shadows were hiding in the holy places. When Deputy Thorne finally caught up with him, Kemp was standing in the cemetery behind the Methodist church. He was covered in soot, his clothes burned, his skin blistered. But his shadow was pristine, darker than any shadow had a right to be, and it moved independently of his body. "They're in the shadows," Kemp said. "All of them. Not just the children, all of us. Everything that makes us real, it casts a shadow. And something's been eating those shadows for a long time." Crow wasn't the beginning. He was just making the process faster. Then he drew his revolver, put it under his chin, and pulled the trigger. Deputy Thorne became acting sheriff. His first official act was to file a report with the county authorities claiming that Walter Kemp had suffered a mental breakdown due to the stress of the missing children cases. The report made no mention of shadows, ice cream, or Silas Crow. It described the incidents as tragic but explainable through natural causes. The county accepted his report. An official investigation concluded that the 12 children had likely been abducted by a traveling criminal, and that Sheriff Kemp's breakdown was unrelated. The case was filed as unsolved and eventually forgotten. But Deputy Thorne knew the truth. In his private journal, he described what he saw in the days after Kemp's death. The shadow children multiplying, shadows appearing where they shouldn't, darkness spreading through Greencastle like an infection. His final journal entry, dated September 15, 1901, describes something he witnessed while patrolling the town square. A new vendor had set up a cart near where crows had been. This vendor sold lemonade instead of ice cream. But Thorne swore the vendor's smile was too wide and his shadow contained small shapes that moved independently. He wrote, "It's starting again. Maybe it never stopped. Maybe there are dozens of them, or hundreds, all across the country. Trading sweets for something essential. Taking pieces of people bit by bit until there's nothing left but shadow." The journal ends there. Deputy Thorne disappeared 3 days later. Only his shoes were found. The town of Greencastle still exists today. It's a quiet community in Putnam County, home to DePaul University and about 10,000 residents. Most people there have never heard of the missing children of 1901. The old records are stored in a basement archive at the county courthouse, rarely accessed, slowly deteriorating. But if you visit Greencastle on a summer evening, pay attention to the shadows. Watch how they move when nothing is there to cast them. Notice if they're darker than they should be, or if they linger after the sun sets. And if you see a vendor with a cart selling frozen treats, look carefully at their shadow before you buy anything. Count how many silhouettes you can see within it. Because according to census records and genealogical databases, there are still 12 children from Greencastle, Indiana, who were never found. Their names were Sarah Hendricks, Timothy Walsh, Emily Crawford, Samuel Porter, Rebecca Pearson, James Mitchell, Mary Thornton, William Garrett, Lucy Hammond, Daniel Fletcher, Catherine Brooks, and Thomas Reed. They went missing in the summer of 1901. And somewhere in the shadows, they're still screaming.